In 1933, the Zionist performance, Romance of a People, exhibited the human sacrifice of the firstborn in the ovens of Moloch. It was a strange public orgy commemorating the ancient worship of the Canaanite god of the planet Saturn. Not coincidentally, 1933 was also the year that Adolf Hitler ascended to the throne of Germany and instituted Theodor Herzl's transfer agreement, which stocked Palestine with the reluctant German Jewish professionals the Zionists needed to form a Jewish state. These rituals of sympathetic magic were scripted forms of practical Cábala. The connection between the Nazis, the Zionists, and the Kabbalists didn't end there, or well. It would not be long before massive human sacrifices to Saturn would commence around the globe during the Second World War. In 1936, in an article entitled "Baal is Not God," the American Jewish Congress Bulletin emphasized the Kabbalistic nature of Nazism as a necessary dualistic counterpart to Zionism. In other words, the article stressed the fact that Nazism was the satanic flip side to the holy Zionist coin, and that one could not exist without the other. The bulletin explained the quintessential Kabbalistic role Nazism played as the needed counterpart to Zionism, as the shell of darkness which always must precede the freeing of the light. The Kabbalists of old, long ago, discovered the dual complexion of ideas. Light and darkness, sacred and profane, God and Satan, all manifest themselves through the same phenomena. Thus, it is with nationalism. It can spell salvation, liberation, and freedom. It can also spell persecution, enslavement, and annihilation. Hitlerism is Satan's nationalism. The determination to rid the German national body of the Jewish element, however, led Hitlerism to discover its kinship with Zionism, the Jewish nationalism of liberation. Therefore, Zionism became the only other party legalized in the Reich, and the Zionist flag the only other flag permitted to fly in Nazi land. It was a painful distinction for Zionism to be singled out for favors and privileges by its satanic counterpart. It became menacing when the chasm dividing the two stepbrothers of nationalism was lost sight of, and the kinship began to produce such an anomaly as Georg Kareski. This cultural autonomy is another example of a satanic counterpart of an idea. As the American Jewish Congress Bulletin observed, the Zionists were the only political party, other than the Nazi Party itself, which was allowed, and they were permitted to fly their own flag. The Nazi flag mirrored the Zionist flag, in that both bore an ancient emblem of androgyny in the middle. The swastika was surrounded by an ocean of the blood of the womb, and the Star of David by the Nile and Euphrates rivers of Greater Israel. The Zionist uniform replicated the Nazi uniform. Both the Zionists and Nazis were privileged parties, and they actively collaborated with one another. The Irgun and Stern-Gang terrorists in Palestine produced the future prime ministers of Israel, Menachem, Begin, and Yitzhak Shamir. They also produced a proposal for a Nazi-Zionist military alliance to form a fascist Jewish state in Palestine, which would fight together with the Nazis against the Allies. Terrorist and Israeli Prime Minister Begin went on to form the Likud Party in Israel, which is closely aligned with the Kabbalistic messianic cult of Chabad Lubavitch. Begin was quite close to the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Shamir was a member of Likud and likewise followed the advice of the Rebbe. Prime Minister Netanyahu is another Likudnik and Chabadnik who was intimately connected to the Rebbe. Begin formed Likud, in part, out of the Movement for Greater Israel Party, and Netanyahu is forever encroaching on Palestinian land. Likud is modeled after the Nazi-imitating fascist revisionist Zionist party of Vladimir Jabotinsky. The Nazis rescued the 6th Rebbe from the Soviets and ensured his safe passage to America, where he then appointed the 7th Rebbe and Messiah of the Jews. Adolf Hitler was also a Messiah, the Messiah son of Joseph, who brought ruin to the Gentiles and chased many Jews to Palestine with his Christ-like whip. Eyewitness and highly regarded journalist Douglas Reed wrote, "If ever a Messiah should be proclaimed, the choice may prove surprising. When I was in Prague in 1939, a rabbi there was preaching that Hitler was the Jewish Messiah, so that a worried Jewish acquaintance asked me what I thought of this. Hitler played the role of Haman, which was scripted in the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, Folio 97b. Jewish journalist and Zionist Emil Cohn, who had changed his name to Emil Ludwig, expressed his gratitude to the Jewish Messiah, Adolf Hitler, and went so far as to predict that a monument to Hitler would someday be erected in Palestine. That monument is the Jewish state of Israel. Emil Ludwig was quoted to this effect in 1935. He said, "Hitler will be forgotten in a few years, but he will have a beautiful monument in Palestine. You know?" And here the biographer-historian seemed to assume the role of a patriarchal Jew. The coming of the Nazis was rather a welcome thing. So many of our German Jews were hovering between two coasts. So many of them were riding the treacherous current between the Scylla of assimilation and the Charybdis of a nodding acquaintance with Jewish things. Thousands who seemed to be completely lost to Judaism were brought back to the fold by Hitler, and for that, I am personally very grateful to him. As for the transfer agreement, Herr Ludwig remarked, "Hitler was certainly the Shylock in this transaction, but Hitler has built a beautiful monument for himself in Palestine. In a few years he will be gone and forgotten, but in Palestine the thousands of German Jews who have emigrated there since his regime went into effect have contributed the scientific and professional ferment that will enrich the entire Yishub for," fellow Zionist and poet Chaim Nachman Bialik opined, "Hitlerism has perhaps saved German Jewry, which was being assimilated into annihilation. At the same time, it has made the world so conscious of the Jewish problem that they can no longer ignore it." Nazi Zionist Julius Streicher believed that Zionism would be the final solution of the Jewish question. At his trial, he maintained, "I have repeatedly emphasized the fact that the Jews should serve as an example to every race, for they created a racial law for themselves, the law of Moses, which says, 'If you come into a foreign land, you shall not take unto yourself foreign women.' And that, gentlemen, is of tremendous importance in judging the Nuremberg laws. These laws of the Jews were taken as a model for these laws. When after centuries the Jewish lawgiver Ezra discovered that notwithstanding many Jews had married non-Jewish women, these marriages were dissolved. That was the beginning of Jewry, which, because it introduced these racial laws, has survived throughout the centuries, while all other races and civilizations have perished. I was convinced that if the party program was carried out, the Jewish question would be solved. The Jews became German citizens in 1848. Their rights as citizens were taken from them by these laws. Sexual intercourse was prohibited. For me, this represented the solution of the Jewish problem in Germany, but I believed that another international solution would still be found, and that someday discussions would take place between the various states with regard to the demands made by Zionism. These demands aimed at a Jewish state.